All right, welcome to episode 30 of TGI Kubernetes. I'm Joe Beta. I'm your host for the day. This is a weekly-ish live stream where I go over interesting stuff going on in the world of Kubernetes and then do a deep dive on some topic, whether it be a new tool or a feature or component of Kubernetes, and really dig into that. I am the CTO of a startup called Heptio. We're focused on bringing Kubernetes to the enterprise. And so I like to start out by, first of all, saying hi to everybody. So we have Sean, who's here in Seattle. Lamati, good to see you again. Kevin, good morning. So you must be further, like you're probably at Saturday for you, I'm guessing. Chris is on Capitol Hill. She's not in the office today. Keith is in Scotland. Leonardo in Brazil. Tim, Fernando in Brazil also. Chris, good to see you, Chris. How's it going? Michael, good to see you. You're in Ireland. And then Enrique in Spain. Racing in Scotland. Gail in France. Wow. Vic is in Santa Barbara. Sean, good to see you. All right, we have tons of folks. Let's see. Oh, Minneapolis. Oh, I'm sorry, it's still cold there, huh? Obina, Joe in London, Saeed in London, Matt in San Francisco, Google San Francisco. That is a beautiful office. The cafeteria there in the Google San Francisco office has this amazing view of the Bay Bridge. And at least I think it was they have a couple cafes, but the one they had like you could borrow like binoculars and go look out. It was really really cool. Eric in Atlanta, Carlton also in Seattle, Lucas from Poland, Carlos from Havana. Good to see you again. All right. All right, so that's, let me get started. So I have a lot of sort of like, one of the things I like to do is talk about new links, new tools, new things that folks have done over the last week. Rise from Montreal, Barrett from Charlottesville. Okay, I'm gonna try and get to things. And so I got a ton of that stuff this week, and I don't want to take too long, but I really enjoy being able to go through and sort of say, look at all the cool stuff that's going on in the larger ecosystem. So with that in mind, I'm gonna jump right in. So the first thing I wanted to call attention to, and let me make the font here a little bit bigger, is here at Heptio, we sponsored the Cloud Native Infrastructure book that Chris, who sits right next to me, works for Heptio, and then Justin Garrison, who works for Disney down in LA. They wrote this Disney Animation, I believe. Justin works for Disney Animation, right? Right, Chris? I had a friend who used to work for Disney, used to call it working for the rat instead of working for the man. I don't know. I shouldn't say that. That's not nice, but we love you, Justin. Okay, so we sponsored the Cloud Native Infrastructure book, and this is the full version of the book. It turns out that depending on how O'Reilly prices these things, sometimes we're able to just do an excerpt like what we did with the Kubernetes up and running, but with this one we were able to do the full book, and so I'm really excited about that. And so all we're asking is a little bit of information, and we'll try and make sure that we use email responsibly. So if you want to get a free ebook copy of that, now's the time. I'll put all of the links in the description after the live stream. The next thing I want to talk about is the CNCF is hosting some projects, some new projects into the sandbox, which is sort of the very early sort of sponsorship tier. And one of those is this project that I started before I started Heptio called SPIFFE. And so it's being developed and driven by this company called Cytail. And they're doing a great job with it. And SPIFFE, if you've ever done any work with managing Kubernetes, you'll know that there's this huge mess around how do you actually get the right certificate authorities and the right certificates moved around and plugged in the right way. And then once you have that done, how do you actually get certificates between workloads that are actually running on the infrastructure, whether it's running on Kubernetes or not. And so SPIFFE really is working to be a common framework for getting the right certificates in the right place at the right time securely. And it would be it's complementary to something like Vault, because Vault can play the role of the CA, but Vault can also be this HashiCorp Vault can also be a secret store. We're going to be working over time to make sure that you can use SPIFFE to be able to access Vault. So it ends up being your bootstrap credential that you can then use to get other information. So exciting, very, very exciting to see SPIFFE move forward there. It's my second project that's in the CNCF, so there you go. All right, so Eller, good to see you again. Ibrahim in Saudi Arabia, good to see you also. Dunkanks in Cork, I'm sure I am, or not, I'm sure I'm messing up names here, I apologize. Marco from Belgrade, so awesome, good to see you all. All right, so the next thing, this is super cool. I'm totally going to build one of these. Tim Carr, and he put up a tutorial here. I haven't dug into it. He grabbed one of the Amazon IoT buttons. These are like you press a button and it sends a signal, and when you press a button, it launches one of the the Kubernetes Quickstarts. So, oh yeah, Tim's online here. Good to see you, Tim. So that's super exciting. I ordered one of these from Amazon. They're a little bit back ordered. $20 to get one of these. And I'm going to try and set up my own. So thanks for doing that, Tim. It looks really, really fun. We need to create like a better label for it to replace the taped on one there. All right, the next thing I wanted to point out, and I haven't had a chance to read all this yet, but Shahid, I apologize if I'm messing up his name, wrote a blog post that goes over a comparison of a bunch of different tools. Oh, and apparently it's on the Orange site right now. Let's see, and there's some good commentary there. I haven't had a chance to dig into this right now, but it goes over some of the pros and cons of these things. And I think one of the things that I assume is coming out of this is that each of these things will do like slightly different things. And so like if you compare sort of like Draft versus Helm versus Ksonnet, there's some overlap between these different things, but same thing with Skaffold or Metaparticle, but I don't think I don't think folks are as clear on the layers as we necessarily maybe need to be. And so that's one of the things that I think folks are working on is to get a better breakdown of this stuff. So yeah. And then Michael's been pointing this out to me, and maybe at some point we can take a look at this and perhaps the next tool that I'm going to be pointing at, which is called kubed-sh, which is really it's kind of like a bash for Kubernetes, where you can launch stuff and it automatically creates a pod around it. So like you're kind of, whenever you hit a command, that actually causes something to happen on your Kubernetes cluster. So it kind of is an interactive way to launch stuff. And then apparently this also does some file syncing stuff similar to the tool that we covered last week, Ksync. And so that's really interesting to see that. And I know he's been working on this for a while, and it's definitely looking interesting. And then the next tool here, this is Click from Databricks, is another really, really interesting tool. And this is more of I believe like more of an interactive kubectl. Whereas, you'll find when you're using kubectl is that you're like dealing with a particular context, an object, and you end up having to copy and paste stuff a lot and repeat like the namespace again and again and again and switching context. All that stuff is really, really a pain. This thing is essentially carrying a bunch of state along and putting that inside of a REPL. So that looks really, really interesting also. And so like the thing here is that you can say, show me all the pods, select pod number 2, describe it. Show me the events. Okay, show me, get me the logs and put them out to a file. Okay, now delete it, right? So you can do all that without having to repeat all your stuff over and over again. So that's super interesting also. And so apparently, like Michael and Thomas have been talking about Ksync, and so they're looking at sort of bringing some of these things together. I love seeing that, because I think if we can build a toolbox here and find the right layers and the right way to break these things down, I think it'll make everything more interesting and easier to make work. So with that in mind, there is some talk around creating a working group in Kubernetes around developer tools. A lot of the stuff that I've been covering in this series, is being brought up here. Things like, Skaffold and Draft and telepresence, Flux, which is really a deployment tool, Minikube. All of these things I think there's a lot of interest around this stuff. There's some, and I'll put this thread, this was on the Kubernetes dev mailing list, I'll put this in the notes also. There's some discussion of whether this should be a separate working group or whether this should be something that SIG Apps should take on. SIG Apps is already pretty overloaded with a bunch of stuff. So, and this definitely, touches on a bunch of different areas. So it's interesting to see some of this stuff start to boot up also. There's definitely a lot of interest around what is it like to develop applications while you're against Kubernetes, right? And so that's, yeah. All right, and then, so Draft, let's see, just a couple of days ago, Draft version 0.12 was released. And this is something I'm going to try and cover next week, is Draft. There's some really big changes with Draft that I think are super interesting. Specifically, it has a fully client-side mode now, which I think makes it much more comparable apples to apples with Skaffold in some ways. And in doing so, makes it much easier to deploy Draft and use it in a bunch of different situations. So things like, they listed here, you can deploy to any installment of Kubernetes. I don't like the word distribution here, but regardless of where and how you're running Kubernetes, you can use it. Things are vastly simplified. The security model ends up being better. And then over time, as we see things like image or build whatever, we can start integrating with those. So I think it's great to see Draft start scoping down a little bit and maybe introduce some of the pluggability that we're looking at. Let's see, another tool that, and this one hit my radar earlier, and I haven't had a chance to play with it yet, but this is Gloo, which is a function gateway, and I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it's built on top of Envoy. Matt Klein pointed me at what these folks are doing, and it looks really interesting, where this ends up being sort of a featureful proxy that you can put in front of things, whether they be regular old RESTful services or whether it be serverless function as a service type of stuff. So it's really interesting, I think, to start to see people use the sort of fundamental building block that is Envoy in new and interesting ways. There's been folks who've been asking, hey, can you do an episode on Envoy? And I've been a little bit hesitant to do that just because Envoy really is not, from an end user point of view, it's going to be rare for people to use Envoy directly. I think a lot of times what we'll see is that there'll be a bunch of sort of control planes that are doing interesting things that are using Envoy under the covers. But what I do want to do, and I'm going to do a little bit of a tease here, Matt's here in Seattle, the engineer who started Envoy, and I'd love to have him do a guest show at some point where we maybe have him in the office standing here with his laptop and we get him up and running and he can do a little bit of an interactive demo with Envoy. So I think that would be really fun. All right, so I'm burning through these. And then finally, we're going to get to Skaffold, and just this morning I saw the announcement that Skaffold v0.3 was released, and so I think there's some interesting stuff going on there. There's some breaking changes there, I think, and so a lot of this is to really make sure that we know that when you see stuff that's this early, you're going to see some churn. When you're working on this stuff, as a developer, you really want to still have some freedom to get it right and break off some of the compatibility there. So there's a huge caveat when you're dealing with tools that are really this early. All right, so before I move on to jumping into Skaffold, I feel like I went through a lot in 15 minutes there, but I still feel guilty about blowing 15 minutes at the start. Are there any other sort of hot topics that folks have seen, around the internet that we should announce? Anything like that? No, the time delay here is tough. So, all right. Well, maybe if stuff comes up, we'll dig into it as we go. But But yeah, let's go ahead and get started with Skaffold. It looks super interesting, and I have not done a lot of pre-flighting here. I haven't had time this week. And so all I have here is a bare bones cluster on AWS. This is the Heptio Quickstart cluster if you want to do something similar. And we're going to try and make Skaffold work on that. Skaffold is... This is the crazy world we live in. It's a project that is coming out of Google Cloud Platform. And so my guess is that they haven't done a lot of testing on AWS, because that's just how these things go. And there was nothing talking about running on AWS anywhere in the instructions. But I'm confident that because Kubernetes is relatively down pat, that we'll actually have a good experience here. We'll see. But the interesting thing here, and I started reading through this, there's some features here. It's a workflow for development where you can actually sort of, build, have it automatically detect, and then do another build and push and reload stuff, which is really cool. Oh, Matt, you're good. So you're the lead dev on Skaffold, and so we can blame you if it doesn't work. Well, we're going to find issues, and we'll file them. And when something's like a v0.3, we're going to scale our expectations appropriately. So don't worry about it, Matt. We'll be nice to you. As long as we're not exposing, dashboards to the internet, we should have a good time. So we'll learn a lot. It looks like there's double duty with Skaffold, and I think this is one of the things that I want to dig into. On the one hand, there's this issue of running that sort of I save code, I have something running in Kubernetes, and really being able to turn that crank as fast as possible. And so in that way, I think Skaffold is very much part of that compile, run, debug loop that we see going on. How's it going, Alex? Good to see you. And then there's the other thing, which is you can also use this to drive deployment when you're in a CI/CD pipeline or when you're actually pushing stuff to production. So I really one of the things I want to get out of this is understand that dual role. If you're looking at sort of like, how do I have a tool that helps me deploy things consistently based on triggers? There's another tool here, which is, and this was mentioned on the developer tools working group, we've Flux, and I think I mentioned this before. So this is another tool, which is how to actually, once you have your application description sitting, say, in Git, how do you actually automatically deploy that in a consistent and automatic way? And so I'm going to be interested to see if maybe there's a little bit of overlap between Flux and Skaffold in that way. Obviously, Skaffold does the development, development loop also, which is definitely not in scope for Flux. Yeah, all right. So features, no server-side component. So there's no overhead on the cluster. And I think, this is probably putting this in contrast to the previous version of Draft, but it looks like Draft is in a similar position now. Detect changes in your source code and then automatically run the build, push, deploy. Manage image tags. So this is really interesting, is that a lot of times when you do a manual version of this, you end up having a make file and all that, and then you end up getting lazy and you're like, I'll just use the latest tag, right? And then you forget to, and then when you write your YAML for Kubernetes, you forget to actually do image pull always, right? And then you're like, I redone this. Why didn't it show up? And you waste 15 minutes figuring out why the heck you aren't seeing your changes show up after you're 45 minutes into a hacking session. And so managing the image tags so that each time you actually do a build, you get a unique image, you push that, and then you update your flow for that, I think is a really interesting thing to call out here. Support existing tooling and workflows, build and deploy APIs, make each implementation composable to support. This is something that I really am looking forward to understanding. Is I love the idea that we can take different tools, start using them in new ways, and really build up a toolbox approach versus a sort of this is the one true way to do things. And then deploy regularly when saving files or run one-off deployments using the same configuration. Okay, so you can either run it in a implicit mode, hit save, stuff happens, or an explicit mode of deploy and do it now. All right, Ali from Sweden, good to see you, and thanks for joining, Mike. All right. So, and I think this diagram does a good job here, is that it looks like Skaffold really thinks about things in terms of build, push, and deploy. and you can configure it with different schemas. So if you're doing development, let's say against Minikube, oh, that's not what I wanted. I didn't want to click on that. You build with your local daemon. You go ahead and you push. You don't have to do a push because you're reusing the same local daemon, et cetera, and then you can do a deploy directly. And so that's the local flow, whereas the remote flow might be something like use the Google Container Builder, which is a service that Google offers, or we could swap in other ways of building in the future, and then you push to say GCR, and then you deploy with Helm. So there's like different ways to actually slice this up. And so we're going to go ahead and look at what's going on here and try and I think for this, I'm going to do local builds because I'm running on Amazon, and I don't think Amazon has anything directly comparable to the Container Builder. We're going to be pushing to the Amazon registry, and then we'll be deploying, to the cluster that I have in Amazon, and we'll look to see if maybe Helm is the way to go, or if there's some other interesting sort of easier changes to really boot up with. Yeah, and so Sean and Matt are talking in the chat about Docker Desktop plus kube control, and yeah, so the edge versions of Docker, and I don't have the edge version of Docker installed, I'm running the main line, does have support for Kubernetes, and this is part of the really sort of nascent support for Kubernetes that Docker is starting to show. And so it's interesting that's being positioned as sort of a side by side with Minikube in this particular situation. All right, so, and then there's Skaffold Dev, which is a continuous deployment, whereas Skaffold Run is that sort of one-off trigger going on. All right, and here's a demo. We can watch a video. Oh, how do I restart it? Because it's a GIF. These videos are actually like, oh, no, what is that? Oh, here we go, okay. These maybe, there we go. These videos are actually kind of, these like GIFs like this end up being a little bit tricky to create. All right, we're not going to wait through that. We've read a bunch of stuff. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Yeah, no, like those GIFs, it's easy to make a GIF of a screencast that ends up being ginormous. Making something that's not like totally huge. Like this one is, let's see. How big is this? Does it tell you? 2.54 megabytes. Yeah, so it's tricky to do it in a way that's actually doesn't end up taking a huge amount of space. All right, so what we'll need, so we need to download the OS X one. So this is what I like seeing, is there's no magic curl to bash. Brew is even better, but that's okay. What's going on? Oh, okay, so this is on the, okay, so what we're doing here is I've already done a git clone of Skaffold, and so I got an error there because I was trying to create a regular old file that was the same way. So what we're going to do is we're going to do cd bin. I'll just do it directly in there. And then it's just saying, hey, please schmod this. Okay, Skaffold. Boom. Help. Let's see, can we do version? We're in version 0.3, so we're good to go. Cool. Matt says we do have a brew installer, but not sure if it's updated to 0.3. There's this really cool toolkit for doing releases. Let me see. So we used it for Ksonnet. For the KS tool, or no, what was K? What did we use? We use for doing releases. I'm trying to remember the name of the tool. It's really cool. Goreleaser. That's right. They even have a website, which is a release automation tool for Go, and it includes like building everything from RPMs to zips to uploading to a release into GitHub. To also doing homebrew. So really, really fun tool there that folks should be aware of. All right, cool. Yeah. Okay. Matt says he's trying to use it for Skaffold. Yeah. So if you need help with that, go ahead and look at it. One of the things that if you use the Ksonnet stuff, I hadn't had a chance to update it yet, is that before it would automatically try and actually create stuff and do your submit for the brew thing, because it doesn't git submit, but we were using a PR flow, and so now they have a mode there where the author added it for us, and I haven't had a chance to update it, where it'll actually create the brew formula sort of someplace where it's up to you to actually check it in and move stuff forward. So it's more friendly to like a PR flow for your homebrew GitHub repo. All right, cool. All right, so did I accidentally click something? All right. All right, so we need Kubernetes cluster, kube control. We're up and running. We have Docker. I don't know if I'm running Docker right now. Let's see. Is it running? Oh, it wants to update to 1803. YOLO, uninstall the update while we're doing other stuff. Oh, 370 megabytes. Holy moly. So this is Docker on the Mac here. You can watch this download. All right. And then the Docker image registry we have to have set up. And so this says, so we could use the Docker one itself, which would be easy, or we can lean on some of the stuff that we did before and try and use the Amazon, the ACR stuff. Why don't we go ahead and try the Amazon one, because I think that's probably more real life. If somebody's doing stuff, you don't want to be, exposing all your dirty laundry, let's try that again type of stuff for the, let's see, we're like, ask for my password here. Oh, not going to do that on screen. There we go. So it's upgrading. Because I think that's probably more realistic. I think anybody who's really doing this, they're either going to do it locally with, like, say, the Minikube flow, or they're going to be working against, some sort of production infrastructure, and they're going to want to be using a private repo. And and if you're running in the cloud, you probably want to use the repository, the Docker image repository that is paired with that cloud. That ends up being the fastest thing there. So let's set that up. I got to remember how to do this because it's been a while. I believe this is under container service, even though it's not part of it. Then we have repositories. Let's get started. Let's call this thing, I don't know, we'll see what we need to call it as we go. Okay. All right, and I've already gone through and cloned that, so here we go. And we'll see cd scaffold, cd examples, cd, let's see, so which one we're going to try? Getting started. Getting started. Okay, so what do we got going on here? So, and the other thing that I've been playing with is using GoLand as my IDE here. And let's see how that works, because I just updated that, so there's a little bit of YOLO going on here. Are you guys all laughing about curl to sudo bash? Exactly. Import, so, this is the first time I've run the latest one, so let's, we're doing it live. License, I'm still in the evaluation period here, so I'm probably going to end up buying it, but I haven't yet. Chris encouraged me to go ahead and do this. I don't know what it's going to show on screen right out the gate here, so let me see. All right, cool. There we go. So that's GoLand, and unregistered VCS, go root. All right, so we're going to ignore all this stuff because I'm not sure what all it means. All right, so what do we got? So we got a Dockerfile here, which is doing the GoLand Alpine Dockerfile thing. Setting the work directory to the whole thing, copying main.go, and then going ahead and do that. So I haven't played with, so supposedly the latest version of GoLand, which was just released, has support for Kubernetes manifest. So I'm really looking forward to that. That should be interesting. Can I, Command plus, okay, yes, thank you, sorry. Let me go ahead and do that. Oh, that, uh-oh, this may be a breaker for GoLand. How do I actually set the, so this is one of those things that like, that VS Code, because it's an Electron app, yeah, it gets that stuff for free. I don't know if there is a, let's see, if I do presentation mode, what does that do? Oh no, that just makes the thing, that's not what I want either. Oh, now it's indexing, how do I get out of here? Maybe, but I don't see the rest of like the stuff that I want. How do I exit presentation mode? Exit presentation mode. I don't want that. How do I? Let's see. So, Chris, do you know if there's a way to like quickly increase the font size? Or like the size of everything here? Oh, and like all my different like sidebars and stuff disappeared too. What happened? All right, you can see I'm struggling here. Project, there we go, okay. Settings and then font, okay, let's give that a try. So y'all can see it. Font, and then we'll do size, 20. Okay, but that only does the editor, that doesn't do the rest of the UI. Yeah, I may go back to VS Code for this. You guys are going to see it happen live here. So that doesn't actually help the UI. So it says appearance, override default fonts not recommended. Is there a presentation mode? I'm very confused by this. Okay, we'll do this, and we're going to actually say we're going to set this to 16 and see how that works. Is it going to break everything? All right, I think we're going to stick with that. That's not great, but it's not bad either. All right, so here we have the Dockerfile. And so this is a pretty darn simple Dockerfile, which is essentially saying, hey, we're going to do nothing more than copy a single file over and then do a go build on that. This is not doing like the multi-stage Docker images, right? So which is something that I think might be, that I would look to be doing in a situation like this. The other thing to keep in mind here, and this is a downside to this approach, is that we're not going to be, like when I do a go build, if I'm doing a big project, this actually may do a lot of stuff. It may, if I have a lot of dependencies and I do a go get as part of this and I'm bringing all this stuff in there, I want to make sure that I'm not recompiling the world every single time. And so I think we'll see, the speed that we see here every time we do a build loop may not be indicative of a significantly sized project that has some real dependencies and such. So that's something to keep in mind also. Let's see, and then here's main, and then we have two things. Yeah, because right now Dockerfile doesn't actually cache stuff from one run to the next. Here's the simple scaffold. In presentation mode, view tool Windows project. Okay, so Vic is saying that like once you get into this mode, you find ways to optimize your Dockerfile. You can chase this down really far, like because I did a bunch of stuff that I probably shouldn't have with the Kubernetes build around sort of caching intermediate stuff so that we could get a Dockerized build as fast as possible. It was really painful to, especially if you start doing like random cross-platform stuff like what we do in Kubernetes. Okay, so Chris is saying in presentation mode, view tool Windows project. Oh, when I'm in presentation mode. So let's try this again. We're going to try and make the presentation mode stuff work. So this does full screen. I don't want to do full screen. I just want to do that size. And then you said view. There's a view tool Windows project. Oh, there we go. Okay. Ooh. Yeah, there we go. That's nice and big. All right. Now you all can see it. All right, we're in good shape now. Sorry about that. And then there's another YAML here. Okay, so this is the scaffold YAML. So this is really interesting. First thing to realize is that this is borrowing the conventions from the Kubernetes API for this YAML file, where it's essentially taking an API version with a sort of what world are we in, sort of this is kind of the name of the API, the version of the API, and then this is the type of this particular object that we're specifying. So that API version kind thing ends up being sort of the trio to identify the schema for a YAML file in the Kubernetes world. Let's see, and Matt's saying we're planning to support non-Docker builds. Previously worked on some of the Bazel rules to build Docker images. I think that will help have much faster builds. All right, very cool. There's some other startups that I don't want to name names because they might still be a little bit stealthy that are doing some really, really interesting stuff around continuous builds also. So yeah, okay, so and then let's see, for building, it's saying, well, here's the name of the artifact, and the workspace is the current thing. So essentially, I assume this says, just do a Docker build locally to be able to do this stuff. And then so this way is a way of saying, hey, I have a local thing, but it doesn't have any parameters that I really need to send. So there's an empty object there. YAML is interesting where JSON is a subset of, YAML is a mostly superset of JSON. And so you can do this sort of inline syntax, which is kind of like JSON inside of YAML. And then the deploy part of it is to go ahead and just deploy all the manifests that start with ksonnet. Okay, so there's a glob here going on. When you're using the Google Cloud Builder, then, okay, so instead of local, what you do is you actually say Google Cloud Builder, and this says project ID. And so I think one of the interesting things is, how is this extended? Are these plugins built in? Is there a discovery mechanism? It makes doing something like parsing this YAML file that much harder if you really truly make this stuff extensible. All right, but the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to actually change the image name, since we're going to be doing our own thing here. And so if we go back to Amazon, we're going to call this Skaffold example. Okay, and so now what we can do is, gotta love me some Amazon. This is the image that we're building now. And so this ends up being your account. We're building and hosting US West 2. DKR is probably left over from a previous version of the ECR. This is probably Docker Container Registry or something like that. I don't know. But when they came out, or I don't know what DKR and then it's very confusing. I'm not sure what DKR stands for. And then this is the name of it. And then, I guess we probably don't need both of these. So there we go. So that's the name of the image. Workspace is there. I probably need to go through and change this also. So we say, here's the image there. So we got that going. All right, I'm going to read the notes here. So presentation mode. It's plain. Okay, so Thomas is asking about the builder integration plugin. So yeah, I'm interested in that. In-tree right now is what Matt's saying. Plan is to do all the development in-tree until we can carve out the APIs and maybe move to a plugin external repo model once we get this stable enough. Sean says Docker. It makes sense just having the options worth it. Yeah. One of the things that, we have been playing around with the HashiCorp plugin stuff, where it launches a sub thing and then you use gRPC to talk to it. For Arc is using that at the Heptio side. So we started using that, and it's pretty interesting. Let's see. Nadar says ECR also supports pulling images in OCI format, probably a different endpoint. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so maybe that's what it is, right? So maybe this is saying I'm doing the Docker version of it versus some other version of that endpoint. Okay, and then then what I can do is, I'm going to do PowerShell. Wait, run the Docker logging command that was returned. I don't want to. Here, I'm going to do this. I don't want to expose this stuff on the camera because I'm not quite sure how. So I'm going to put it on my face here. I'm going to do this. Oh, and I got to do, okay, give me a second here. All right, okay, I'll do this. It'll work. It'll be fine. So what I have is AWS. Actually, give me a second here. I want to switch back from my face. I got to be careful because whenever I'm doing this stuff, I don't want to flash credentials on the screen because then I have to go rotate them later, and that's a total pain in the butt. So And I just want to make sure that the configs that I have set up. Okay. Now let me switch back. So what I can do export AWS profile equals demo. So what you can do is you can set up different profiles with the AWS tool if you have multiple accounts or if you're doing roles into an account. And then I can run, where did that? And then I should be able to run this command here. And this is going to ask me, oh no, it didn't ask me for anything. Sometimes it asks for two-factor auth. And then, okay, I'm not going to worry about people copying this. And then I take this and I run this. And Docker's like, whoa, you're passing a password over that, but it's fine. Okay, so now I should be able to a Docker push of that thing up to the AWS, the ACR stuff. Now, this particular credential, I believe, is good for like 20 hours or something like that. So if you're using this flow, you're going to have to do this about once a day. So Nick says, does Skaffold support supplying registry credentials, or does it just require you to do the Docker login to push the images? My guess is that, and I'd love to get Matt's take on it, my guess is that the build stage here is really build and deploy. Or maybe, I don't know, or build and push, right, is probably here. But I think we'll dig into that and we'll understand what's happening. I may have some bad assumptions. We're going to see how things work. The other thing that I'm interested in is that nowhere here did we deal with the image tag, right? And so like if Skaffold builds an image and gives it a tag, will this pod YAML, how will we actually specify what the tag is there? And one thing it could do is do a little sort of sneaky search and replace along the way, or it could be something that's more explicit. I think that's something that's going to be interesting, or maybe that's part of the deploy options that you can specify it. Okay, so yeah, so build is build and push, and then we'll call credential helpers if you have them configured during your Docker config, but you handle the auth otherwise. All right. Yeah, likewise with the kube control context. Okay, so, all right, so here we are. I'm going to do Skaffold dev. And so is it going to do, so it's running a build. And we're pulling down that GoLand Alpine image. That's a one-time thing. And then it's doing the build. Doing the go build here on this stuff. And then it's pushing it. And this is also a one-time thing. So the future loops will be faster here. And then now it's like deploying this thing and waiting for changes. Okay. So, oh look, and then, so what is the program doing? I probably should have looked at that. What is this doing? So this thing is, oh, this is just going in a loop, doing a, once a second doing this. Okay, so then the next thing that Skaffold does is it goes through and it actually just tails the log out of that particular container that we launched. So it logs every second. So, okay, Nick is saying, or Nadir is saying that there is the AWS Labs, the ECR credential helper, which I believe auto-renews credentials for you, is something that's probably worth looking at it. Okay. So the log integration is super nice. Yeah, that's really cool. And so it kind of has like a Kale type of thing built into it. You guys know Kale? I talked about this before. This is a fun tool. This is a Kubernetes log viewer that lets you specify a whole bunch of stuff for doing it. So it has a Kale-like thing built into it. All right, so Skaffold has done the following for you. Build an image from the local source, tag it with its SHA-256, sets that image in the Kubernetes manifest defined in Skaffold.yaml, and then you kube control apply. So let's start looking under the covers. Let me open a new thing here. And actually, no, let's do, I always get confused, but we're going to do view session. Where do I split? I never remember. Why is it under shell? I don't know. Split horizontally. Boom. Okay. So we're going to watch that. So we're going to go cd tgik, and then I have my fun thing here that automatically quickly sets it up for us. Cube control get pods. So we see we have the one pod going on there. Cube control get pod getting started. Oh, YAML. And what we'll see here is that this thing actually did specify the full SHA on the stuff that's going after that. Yeah. And then going through, and I believe this ends up being the pod name then that this thing is actually talking to. Okay. So let's go and make a change. Hello, TGIK. We're going to do that. So suppose I haven't hit save yet. Oh, did it auto-save for me? I don't know. I don't think I hit save. Maybe it's just a reflex. But it looks like it's automatically, boom, and then it relaunched it. So I think that is pretty darn good in terms of being able to relaunch something super quickly. So so GoLand has autosave on. Okay, so there you go. That's what was going on there. So I can do like that, and it'll do a rebuild. Maybe. I'll hit save. Huh. Did I miss something? Or I'm going to hit Control C and start it over again. Ignore it. I don't know what happened there, Matt. It seemed like it kind of got confused and hung. All right, so hello, TGI Kates. GoLand or GoLand or GoLand. Wherever how you pronounce it. Yeah, okay. So, cool. I mean, so that's the flow, and that's actually, I think, really interesting. I think if we compare this, no worries, I want 0.3, right? I think if we compare this to the Ksync approach that we looked at last week, I think the latencies here are longer, but this is friendly with respect to a compiled language, which is not something we were doing with Ksync. I think there is some work with Ksync to be able to deal with the compiled languages, but it's not something that is really, I think, in the sweet spot for it. And then this is also building real images, and so you end up building something that ends up looking a lot more similar to what you're going to deploy. So that's actually really, really cool. Let's see, and so a couple of questions I have. So the first one is that if we go and if we look at this thing now, and I go hit done here now, I should see, oh look, here's the three different things I have. One of the things that's a little bit confusing to me here is that we have the image tags, which are a SHA-256, and then we have the SHA-256 of the resultant built image. And these things end up being different. And my guess is this is a SHA-256 of that directory. It's not clear what that's actually, what that is actually iterating over for that. So that's something that I want to understand a little bit. I want to understand how exactly do we get that tag in there and actually modify the YAML. I'd like to play with this and do something like a replica set with 3 replicas and see how that works too. So I think that's probably something that we can play with. All right, and so now we can go through, and if we do this, we can also do scaffold run, which says, hey, just turn the crank once. So it says, so it does a build, and then it tags it. Yeah, so there's a lot of hashes going around here. So there's successfully built something, and this is maybe a random, and then tagged it with this, and then tagged it with this thing here, which looks like that's maybe the git hash that it's using. to actually do that. Run defaults to the git commit tagger. Oh, okay. I want to understand a little bit about taggers. Okay. So Michael's asking, do you plan to do some sort of dark magic to auto-generate the configs? I would view the generating, so this is, I think, Michael, this is the interesting breakdown between sort of like this tool here versus how do you specify your application definition and then how do you trigger that, right? And so I think it's interesting to think about how we pair these things together, but I would view sort of like auto-generating a set of YAML files and configs from sort of trying to detect what's happening in a directory, which is, you know, the Cloud Foundry model or OpenShift does some of that stuff, as a separable problem from this actually turning the crank, you know, build push type of thing. Okay, so that is, I think that's a great first demo here. And then, so there's some more things I want to understand about this. So the first one being, okay, so we can understand the Helm stuff. So how does Helm look differently? So we have a Helm deployment example. And to do this, you have to sort of like bootstrap and create your own little Helm chart. And I'm not going to dig into that right now, but we can take a look at it. And I don't have Helm installed in this cluster yet. Let's see. So here we have Skaffold.yaml. And what we end up here is this. Okay, so this looks like this is Helm targeted at some local Minikube thing, right? Because the image name here is bare, which says that there's no place to upload it. So my guess is that the build, whenever you build, will, oh, and then there's something new here. There's the tag policy. I don't know what tag policy is. But whenever you build, my guess is that Skaffold is like, hey, I don't see a repo on there and I don't see anything. It's just a plain name. So really there's no way to push it. And so it probably doesn't bother pushing in that case. And so this particular example then would only work when you're working against like a Minikube. And then there's releases, chart path, the namespace, and then, okay, and then you have to manually map saying, here's the image parameter that you actually want to send through this. And so this assumes something about the values that you have in your Helm chart. And so let's look at the Helm chart that they have here. And then also, I don't know, like, what is this building? Does it actually, the Dockerfile here is nothing but Nginx. Okay, so it's just a sort of a super simple type of thing. But then if we look at Skaffold here, there's the values.yaml. Okay, this is the Nginx, or Nginx one. And the value, oh wait, no, this is, I'm confused. All right, so this is the full Nginx chart that got pulled in here, or at least a significant one. Oh, no, it's not. This is a cut-down version of the Nginx chart that includes that includes ingress and deployments and all that. Okay. Chart, release, heritage. So yeah, so this is there, and then it looks like these values are the defaults for that, and then you're essentially saying, okay, so one of the interesting things is that we have the repository and the tag, which are separate here. Okay, so okay, wow, okay, so there's some assumptions going on here, and some of this is based on sort of the conventions for how Helm works. But if we look at the Skaffold.yaml here, it's saying values as images, but images is really a object that actually has 3 values under it. That includes the repo, the tag, and then the pull policy. And so it's probably assuming the 3 sort of sub-values there, which is really a convention type of thing. Let's see, we're hoping to favor higher level application representations other than kube control and Helm. Yeah, I'd love to see this integrated with Ksonnet. Definitely something that I'm interested in seeing. Ksonnet is really built to be driven by tools like this because, again, it's all client side. And I like the idea that you can pass some of the values that are going on there. With Ksonnet, you'd probably pick the environment that you're working against. Let's see, the tag policy is how you configure how the build step will tag the image. So I want to look into the different options there. Oh, and then Matt says that there's an annotated scaffold.yaml in the examples directory, so I'm definitely going to look at that. And then Vic says the helm create nginx, the default starter. Okay. Okay, it uses value.values.image. Value.values.image. Okay, so you're thinking that the values file was not updated in that example, so maybe. All right, so so it expects the fully specified image or the broken out thing. I think that's something that's worth looking at. All right, but let's go through and we'll look at the example. And here's the annotated scaffold. So this looks really interesting. And I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to do this. You guys got to call me out when the font's too small. Okay, so tag policy determines how Skaffold is going to tag your image. We provide a few strategies here, although most likely you won't need to care. So one of these is tags the image with the checksum of the built image. Okay, so that confuses me because here's the SHA-256 and then here's the image tag, and these things are different. So maybe I'm misunderstanding. Oh man, and they are long. So this thing starts with 114. Do we have a 114 in here? So I'm wondering if like this is just weirdness with Docker where the name of the image becomes part of the image tag. So that's the image digest. Are those layers not familiar with ECR? Thomas says, I've blown my foot off using the git commit tag. And yeah, you can get conflicts on that because it's not super specific when you have dirty stuff. I believe, let's do a little bit of examination here. Let's do Docker images, make this big. And the one that we talked about here that I just built, let's try and examine what's going on here. I don't think they're layers, but the latest one that I built was, oh, this is interesting. I mean, one of the things that I think would be interesting here is to have some sort of tagging strategy that embeds the time and date that the thing was built along with some unique thing, because then they're going to sort well. Whereas right now, if I sort by image tags, I believe then these things are going to actually sort out of order. So the time that the thing was built, maybe in UTC, might be a useful tagging strategy also. So the one that we're looking at is the C7A. Okay, so we have this one here. So I can do Docker. Okay, and then the image is C7A2. But okay, so that's the image hash, which is different from the SHA hash. Docker, oh God, what is the command for this? Info, no. Images, no. I want to go deep on an image. Do they have, okay, image. Now they have like a sane thing that they added onto it. Let's see, build, history, import, inspect. Okay, so we'll go ahead and look at that. And what we'll see, okay, so that is the top layer. And so what you'll find is that there are two different ways to actually address a Docker image. So one of them is via an image tag, which you can essentially rewrite and reparent, and so there's no guarantees with it. The other way is with the SHA-256 way of doing this stuff. And so this, I believe, like Docker image SHA-256, I believe instead of like the way you specify this is that there's a different way. I'm sorry, I'm just digging into this because I don't remember this. Blah, blah, blah. So right now you have like the repo, and then the tag name. I think when you're using the SHA, I think you use an @ sign in front of it. That's the digest. You can pull based on the digest, I think. Maybe I'm... Stuff is useless. All right. So, but anyway, so like there's like, and you can't fake that. That's sort of built in as part of the image. Yeah. So Matt's right. It's like image @ SHA-256 in the checksum. And so I think not everything's plumbed through to be able to take those types of images. Like if you're doing a Helm container and you separate out the image and the tag, then like it assumes that you're actually going to be using a colon between those things. Whereas I think other times when you specify things, you actually have the image be one opaque blob that you can pass through, and then you can specify the SHA-256. One of the things that Kubernetes does, if we do kube control get pods, and if we look at this, the YAML for this particular pod, what you'll see here is that we both have the image here, but then we also have the image ID here, which is fully resolved. And so this is one of the things that the kubelet, I believe, writes back in the status. So if you say, if you do something silly like reuse latest again and again and again, this is where you can see, okay, which image am I actually using? Because this SHA-256 here can't be faked. And so one way to do this is you could actually, have a way to actually specify that when you go ahead and push stuff. Okay, so let's go through. I want to learn a little bit more about this. So we're going deep here. We're doing depth first. The artifacts here is the name of the image that we're going to build, and the workspace is the Dockerfile context, and then we can also have the Dockerfile path. Okay, so these are the things that get bundled up and get sent to the builder. One of the things that I think would be interesting here, and it's something that I would suggest that you think about as you think about the schema here, is that Dockerfiles may not be the end-all, be-all way to actually specify what you want to build, right? Over time, we may find that there are better ways to specify the sort of build script for an image that goes beyond Dockerfiles. And I think, I just want to leave room because as we start seeing building move from this thing that is built into the Docker daemon in a sort of really tightly coupled way to a composable tool set, which is we're starting to see that happen with Builda. We're starting to see that happen with the image stuff that Jesse did. We're starting to see that happen with the stuff that Lord Cypher's been doing forever, right? There's going to be room for people to innovate in terms of what does my build script look like? And do I go through and have something that's a Docker file, or do I find other ways to actually specify things? I'd love to see a mix of something like Nix, which is this package manager with Docker, because it's immutable. Docker images are immutable. Can we actually move those things together? And so I think if I was going to give you advice on the schema here, we have both the artifacts, but then have a build strategy, or have something like, okay, we're doing Docker under that, and there's, the Docker build is one build strategy, but if we're using image or builder, they may have different ways of describing stuff. Yeah, so Matt says that's exactly what we're thinking about now. Yeah, so how does this look for something like image or cluster builds? And I think and then it's the difference of how do you specify how you build the artifact versus how do you specify what you're using to build the artifact, right? And maybe the local versus versus the Google Cloud Builder, are those things actually maybe this should be collapsed up into the artifact, but if you're building multiple images, you don't want to have to repeat yourself. So there's a little bit of a fully blown out, denormalized thing to this schema versus, hey, do we want to make this thing be more normalized and human friendly? So yeah, something to think about there. Okay, so there's the local strategy, which defers to everything in Docker config for authentication information for things like push. But then in that we'll use Docker credential helper and all that stuff. But, and you can do skip push true there when you're doing that. The annotation here doesn't mention the Google Cloud Builder. I assume that's a peer to local. But it probably has its own ways of doing stuff. And then deploy here, we have kube control, manifest, and then you can actually specify the ones that you're doing. I would expect, and I'm curious to see. And this does a kube control apply, which is good. I'm curious to see how does the actual image tag get injected in here. There's probably an injection method here, and maybe you look for the existing image name and you just replace that. Something super duper dumb and simple like some sort of Sentinel handlebars type of thing. But then if you're not careful, this starts to replace templating solutions here. So, so that's something that I want to dig into here also. Okay, so cool. So that's a little bit more annotation on what's going on there. Then we have one that has no manifest. What does no manifest look like? So this says deploy manifest. You just don't specify anything, and it's like, I got nothing to do. Okay. Skaffold. This will deploy simple. Oh, wait, okay. If you're using kubectl deployer, you can deploy images without accompanying Kubernetes manifest. Simple deployment template. Oh, okay. So it just assumes that it has a deployment template. Okay. Instead of doing a pod, it does a deployment, because that's what you'll get when you get that. All right, cool. That's nice. And then microservices is going to be something, and we got Leeroy web and app. How do we actually do multiple? Oh, I'm going to read the README because that's how I roll. Deploy multiple applications with Skaffold. Only rebuild and redeploy the artifacts that have changed. Okay, so there's a... So then Skaffold probably says, hey, I see the image tag show up in this YAML, so I only need to redeploy that YAML versus actually redeploying the other stuff. So Skaffold dev. Now in a terminal, hit the Leeroy web endpoint. Okay, I want to play with this one. Let's go through this and actually see how this works. All right, let's do that example next, because I think that one looks really interesting. And it was updated as of 14 hours ago, so it's got to be nice and fresh and usable. All right, so this is going to be the microservices, and we're going to GoLand this, and what does it do? Is it going to pull it up? What do we got? I don't know. That didn't work. What am I doing? No, it's all upset. Okay. Still learning the GoLand. Okay, Michael says, seems my chat was full of my message today. Yeah, I hate that YouTube doesn't let you post URLs. There's Kubernauts Parameterizer. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Is what's Michael's pointing at here. Kubernauts. What is it? Kubernauts Parameterizer. Okay, so this thing. Okay, oh, there's something going on here. I don't know. So there's parameter controller. It puts it together and then sends that to an installer. Source. I'm confused because there's also helm template. Parameter is a command line tool, and Kubernetes operates for handling application lifecycle management. So this looks like, I don't know. This looks like, I wonder how much. Like yet another sort of like way to specify and sort of put stuff in there. Okay, wow. All right, so that's an interesting thing. I'm going to save that in a tab. I'll definitely put it in the notes there for you, Michael, so that we can take a look at it. But yeah, I think, there's going to be a gazillion opinions on templating languages here. Okay, so this says, so we're going to go ahead and do this. And this one assumes Minikube also, but we're not doing Minikube. So let's go through and see if we can fix it up for non-Minikube. So we have Skaffold. So this says, okay, so I'm building two things here. And, okay, and so now I'm going to have to create, so this is one of the downsides of ACR, is that you have to explicitly create the ones that you're good, the repositories that you want to push, right? So we're going to call one Leeroy web. And we'll go ahead and save that. And I don't think you can create, I don't know if ACR supports having internal slashes. That's a relative, that's a Docker registry API v2 feature to be able to do that. To actually have hierarchical registry names. I haven't tried it out yet. All right, but here we go. We're off to the races now. So those are the things we're going to build. Now my guess is that if I dig in here and if I look at Kubernetes and we have a service and a deployment, if I don't fix this up, it won't know where to actually like inject in the right the right thing. So we'll go ahead and actually save that. Let's see, what are you all saying? So Michael says it allows the app operator to use any language like Helm or Ksonnet, Kinflate. All it does is automate the transformation steps. That seems like maybe, I don't know, we got to think about, because we shouldn't assume that that inputs are always going to be like a JSON sort of values file. I think there's always there's going to be more interesting ways to capture this stuff in the future. It's an interesting thing. All right, so let's see. So okay, so now we should be good. And in building and deploying here, theoretically, should be nothing more than scaffold dev. Let's do that. And I'm going to show off something else really, really cool here very soon. All right, and let's look at these things. So this one is, they're both Go files. One's calling from GoLand 10, so that's why we're actually, and this is the full GoLand 10. This is not the like Alpine version, so we're pulling down a heavy-duty base image here. But obviously, this is a one-time thing. You saw that before, that this stuff gets. So for Amazon with ACR, because you have to explicitly go through and specify what all the images are, the image repositories that you want, it's a pain in the butt because you have to sort of be very explicit up front. But Amazon is much more flexible than GCR with respect to being able to set, individual permissions for access to different repositories. And so with GCR, you can essentially have one policy for, essentially your all your images in a particular GCP project. With ACR, it's much more flexible about being able to specify access policies on a registry by registry basis. All right, so here we go. Leeroy app server ready. And we see that now if I go, and this is both, somebody forgot, I'm going to fix that. Let's fix that. So that said Leeroy app server ready, but it's not the app server, it's the web server. So let's go this, and I bet you there was some copy and paste going on here. We're going to go app server ready. Boom, let's fix it. It's rebuilding, it's rebuild, pushing. There we go. Oh, I used Leeroy app. I screwed up. Oh, this is going to be interesting here. If I change on the web, when I look at this, if I change my YAML, does it automatically actually detect that as part of it? Leeroy web. We're going to go ahead and do that. But they did screw up and actually say, this is Leeroy web. Okay. Okay, what's going on here? Starting the deploy. Watching. Did it already happen? I don't know. All right, so we have one of app, one of web. Cube control get pods. If we do wide, that actually, does it tell us? No, we want to know like what is the image that's running. No, okay, that's the images. Okay, here's the images here. So they're both running app. So something didn't recognize my change to the web server here. I think we got Skaffold wedged again. I'm sure there's something silly going on there. So, all right, so this is doing the redeploy. And now we have web and app. Okay, so we're up and running. All right, and so let's see. Okay, Matt's saying not yet. It doesn't actually do a redeploy on the YAML change. Which is okay, because I think what you'll find is that, like, let's say that you're doing node development. Developers understand that, hey, my regular flow as I'm doing stuff will work fine. But there's going to be certain things that if I change something that's really sort of fundamental to my web server or whatever, I really need to go ahead and restart the web server, that type of thing. If you look at something like Hugo also, it'll also automatically do like a reload type of thing. But if you change some of the core parameters, you really need to just sort of restart the server daemon. So that's not, I mean, one of the interesting things, Matt, that might be a cheap way to deal with this is to essentially say, hey, I noticed something changed that I can't handle. You probably want to restart Skaffold dev to actually have it deal with that. Okay, now it says Leeroy web server ready. Okay, and it only had to roll the one that changed. I'm not sure why I got 2 copies of that log line. My guess is that getting logs out of Kubernetes is a little bit error prone, and so I got 2 of them. Okay, so now we're up and running, and I can do kube control get services, and we see that we have the web service, which actually has a node port to make it Minikube friendly, and then we have Leeroy app, which has a cluster IP, but it doesn't have a cluster IP. What happened there? Let's look at the YAML. Leeroy app, cluster IP none. Okay. So it's type equals cluster IP, but saying don't give me a cluster IP. Interesting. I believe what happens with this is that you then get individual DNS entries. It's a headless service. Yeah. It's only supposed to be called by Leeroy Web. And then okay, so this is the type of thing. If I go through here and I go through replicas 5 and I save this, and this thing won't notice it. And I'm using a headless service like this. And then let's go ahead and I'm just gonna do a little teaching here. If I launch a CRD up in this thing, that's not what I wanted. Okay, so and then I launch a QuarD. So first of all, the thing is that we have kube control version. I'm running 1.10 of the client kube control. I'm still doing a 1.9.5 thing, and I go through and I do a kube control port forward. Actually, we're gonna do, okay, I'll get to it. Okay, so it's QuarD 8080. Let's do that. And now we go localhost 8080. We can go through, and here I have my DNS thing. And so now if we do Leeroy app, you'll see that now we have 5 A records here. And so what this means is that it's up to the client to recognize that there's 5 A records and either do some sort of round robin-y type of thing to be able to actually deal with it. So this actually says it's up to the client to do whatever load balancing makes sense. And normally what happens here is that the order of these things gets rotated by the DNS server every time you do it. I don't know exactly which DNS server we're running in the 194 Minikube or 194 Heptio Quickstart. But it's not doing this rotation here. So that's something that is unfortunate. And so what'll happen is that, everybody will just glom onto this first guy that's going on here. And so that's why you might want to use cluster IP instead of doing a headless service in a situation like this, if you're actually going to scale out the app and the front end separately, such that you do get some good spraying on a connection by connection basis. All right, so that's a little bit of a going deep there. And then let's see. And then the next thing I want to look at is, all right, so we're doing 5 of the web guy, or no, 5 of the apps, and then let's do 5 of the web also. And I want to see what happens when this comes up. We should see logging across all these things. Yeah, so you get to see the logging across all of these things as the web server comes up. And then the other ones were left running. Okay, so now this is the cool thing that I'm super excited about. If I do kube control port forward, and I can do deployment / Leeroy web, and then I want to, what port is it? It's 8080. and I do that, it's like, oh, let me just grab a single pod out of that deployment and go ahead and do the port forward there, which is super exciting because like I'm tired of doing that copy and paste. So now if I go to localhost, I'm like, Leeroy app. All right, so we got it running. So that we have the web server in front of it. It's talking to the back end. Let's do something a little bit. Let's validate my theory here. So let's go to Leeroy app and Leeroy app, and we'll do S, and then what is it, os dot hostname. We'll go ahead and we'll hit that. That's going to do a rebuild here, which is what we expect. Oh, it's mad at me. Okay, so it's mad at me. So this is interesting. So what happens when you see an error? It aborts and it doesn't do the push or the run. So that's actually, so we're going to be doing, that's a good part of the development process here, is that you can actually see this. Now I think if you were doing like a Skaffold dev in like a terminal window in your browser, then you can go through and probably just go ahead and click on this thing, and that'll be nice. You know, if we see tools like this get better and better, what you may find is that there's a continuous build going on in the background, and those errors get integrated with your IDE in a good way where they actually show up automatically. So that'll actually be really cool. So now I want to do hostname. I do os.hostname. That returns a string and an error, and we're going to go host name. We'll do hn YOLO, and then there we go. All right. Did you notice it? You did not notice it. Okay, I think there's a bug in Skaffold. Sorry, man. I'm sure that'll get fixed. We're going to see a 031 pretty soon there, or maybe it's something special about my setup. But now it's watching for changes. It says, okay, now all the app servers are ready. They've pulled it. I go here, and we're always getting the first one, which is XJM2G. And let's go through and in Leeroy Web, what it's doing is it's actually going through and just doing a get. So it's not doing anything special. It's using the resolver that's built into GoLand. And so I'm going to go through, I'm going to be like, we don't want none for cluster IP here. This is going to be a test of kubectl apply also, because this might be an edge case in kubectl apply. Have to restart this thing to reapply the thing. Oh, deploying manifest. Cluster IP, invalid value, this, yeah, so that is a bug in kubectl apply right there. We're going to do, we're going to actually delete kubectl, delete. There is a lot of thinking going into how do we actually rethink apply, because it's like chewing gum and baling wire. And so, okay, so now this thing deployed. So like, that's not what we would expect here. So actually sort of like, you know, so that's a test case for kubectl apply, is that if I actually have cluster IP none and I actually remove it, it doesn't actually turn that back into a default. The way apply works is it thinks that you're actually setting it to a null value. So there we go. So now, maybe this will work. Oh, DNS caching in the GoLand client is breaking me. Oh man, okay. Cause go HTTP client re-resolve. Is there, or no, that wouldn't be that. It should be using the, What am I doing wrong here? Kubectl get pods. We're running. Okay, this thing has an IP address now. I wonder if it's still like deferring to like, I don't know. I would expect to see this rotate, but there's some sort of stickiness going on there. All right, well, there you go. Yeah, you're right. You probably needed to close the connection. How do we actually do that? Let's do GoLang HTTP client close connection. I don't want to close the connection. How do I close the connection? HTTP close. Client must close. That's when doing a... Oh, you have to close the body, otherwise you leak the connection. Are we leaking connections here? This is why we need some Prometheus here to actually look at this. If I look at this, oh, we are deferring the body close. Okay, so we're not leaking the connection there. Close, notify our server, transport. We need to close idle connections. How do we get the transport? So we can do, no. Response.close. How is that different from response.body.close? So I don't know the internals of this stuff here. Response.close is probably when, okay, do you all know? Yeah, maybe if we did a for loop with a close in the shell, we'd actually overload it, and then it would actually like create new connections. HTTP, how to close net HTTP connection. Let's see, what does it say? This is from 2014. Oh man, you got to get fancy here. Okay, get file, dial timeout. You're requesting client keep alive for subsequent request. We want to turn off keep alive. Where do we get the transport from? Is transport? No, that's like a transport. How do I get the transport? All right, I'm totally down a rat hole here. Okay, Vic is trying to type stuff. I think in the transport you can do disable keep alive's true, right? But like we don't have a transport, and we're just doing the simple HTTP get. All right, let's. I'm down a rat hole. I'm going to find my way out to the other side. You got to create the client, yeah. So we're going to do a transport here. Max idle connections 0. Connection idle timeout. Disable compression true. We'll do like, what is it? Disable keep alive's true. And then it's mad because I'm not using it. And then I can go through and we create the client. And then we're not reusing the client at all, so we probably don't even need to disable the keep alives. And then we can do client here. Oh, not that. Don't do that. Okay. So, yeah, create the client. Yeah. Okay. So there we go. I think that'll get us there. Now as we've been doing this. Okay. So if we were developing, we would expect that Skaffold in the background would be like building, and by the time I switch back, I'd have an up-to-date one that's been built and pushed. But Skaffold got wedged, so pretend that happened. And all this stuff was happening while I was typing in the other window. Then I'm like, okay, now, oh, my port forward got lost, okay. Yes. This is exactly what we would expect. So now we can verify that our front end is load balancing against the back ends. Yeah. Oh, and there's a default transport that we could have used. Okay. So I didn't necessarily solve that the best way. But I think this starts to show like I did not take a lot of time to sweat the details of like how do I actually build and push this stuff forward. And I think it also goes to show that when you're developing a microservices-based application, we could have set all this stuff up to work on a local machine where these things were talking to each other over local ports, but we wouldn't have noticed the issue here necessarily where we actually have ourselves pinned to a single back end, right? And so by actually doing development in an environment that's as close as possible to our production environment, which is Kubernetes, then we're able to actually test this thing out in a realistic way, which is actually really cool. All right, so I'm going to leave it there because I'm an hour and a half in. I'm really excited about Skaffold. I think it looks really interesting. I love the focus on providing a framework. I guess that's the name Skaffold. The focus on providing a framework here for how you can actually think about this cycle. And then having pluggability in terms of the tools that you use, whether it be a local build or cloud builder or some fancy new thing that comes along in the future. I'm also interested to see, like, is there room to actually specify things that move beyond Dockerfiles? Being able to use a kube control versus the helm stuff, that seems really interesting also. The one question I wanted to do, and I didn't see this anywhere, and maybe Matt, you can help me here, is how do we inject, when you're doing the kube control apply stuff, how do you inject the image tag into the YAML? Do you just do like a string search for the thing? That's the one thing that I wasn't sure about. And maybe that's in the docs, maybe it isn't. I didn't actually go into the docs. So we have some concepts here, and so Matt, yeah. You parse the YAML and then do a string replace on the image keys. Now, you do that in a blind way. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if I had a CRD with my own custom controller because I'm like, hey, I want to have a super duper cron job, or I want, or a super duper deployment. Like, let's say that I'm using the meta controller with its blue-green deployment CRD, and I want to mix that with Skaffold. Now I'm actually using a type of object that Skaffold probably doesn't know about because it's a CRD. Will you look for that string that shows up anywhere, or will you actually look for that in a very specific place? And I think that's some of the, it might be worthwhile to think about, okay, you have this default way where you recognize the stock Kubernetes image, but maybe having a build step there where you could run some sort of like program that says, hey, here's a temporary directory where we've staged all the YAML files. Why don't you go ahead and run whatever program you want to that'll go ahead and find the right thing and substitute in the image there. So that might be another extensibility point to think about. Because I'd love to see this, working with something like the meta controller and a blue-green deployment to really start to see how these things might actually work together with CRDs. All right, so that's it. Oh, and so let me switch back here. So it does look like there's some good documentation that's actually being built up here, which is good. Okay, it's pretty bare bones right now, but I like to see at least there's some thinking going on there. So, all right, well, that is it for me. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Have a great weekend. If your weekend hasn't already started, I know a lot of folks who are joining me from places that are far flung have already started their weekend. And I will be back next week. I'm going to do draft. The week after that, I'm going to be on vacation. Me and the family are going to be climbing down into the Grand Canyon and climbing back out. If I survive that, the week after that, I think I'm going to be looking at telepresence. So thank you very much, and I'll see you all later. Goodbye.